Pacific dawn, a canvas of pale rose and deepening azure, found Admiral Taman Yamaguchi a figure etched in steel against the vast undulating horizon. June 4th, 1942, a date destined to be forever branded into the annals of naval warfare. Upon the bridge of the Hiryu, an immensity of steel and purpose, he walked, a silent tempest contained within a disciplined frame. His thoughts, however, were anything but still. Today, the weight of command pressed upon him, a heavy cloak woven from ambition and responsibility. He bore the honour and the burden of leading not one, but two leviathans of the sky, the Hiryu and the Soryu. These two ships, alongside their sisters, the Akagi and the Kaga, formed the Kido Butai, a fist of aerial might, a force feared and respected across the vast expanse of the ocean. 2 hours prior, as the first tendrils of sunlight pierced the morning haze, a swarm of 108 aircraft had been unleashed. Their target, Midway Atoll, a strategic jewel coveted by the Empire, a dagger pointed at the heart of American power in the Pacific. The operation, audacious in its scope, was intended to cripple the US military presence, to pave the way for unchallenged dominance. Yet, beneath the surface of calculated strategy, a disquieting unease gnawed at Yamaguchi's resolve. His pacing, a metronome marking the passage of time, was abruptly halted by the approach of Captain Tomeo Kaku, the Hiryu's steadfast commander, his face etched with a gravity that mirrored the Admiral's own. He bore a message, terse and urgent, from their superior, Admiral Nagumo, the overall commander of the operation, a communication that sent a chilling tremor through the already charged atmosphere. The strident blare of the alarm shattered the relative calm aboard the Hiryu, a visceral shriek that heralded imminent danger. The news, quickly disseminated, was stark and unwelcome. American aircraft, launched from the still operational Midway base, were bearing down upon them, a vengeful swarm seeking to disrupt their carefully laid plans. The hunters had become the hunted. Swiftly, the nimble Zeros, the aerial samurai of the Japanese fleet, scrambled to intercept the attackers, rising with a roar to meet the challenge. Like hawks descending upon unsuspecting prey, they tore through the ranks of the American torpedo bombers, machines of courage but lacking the crucial protection of fighter escorts, their sacrifice a testament to desperation and valour. Still, despite the devastating onslaught of the Zeros, a number of American aircraft pressed home their attacks, their pilots unflinching in the face of overwhelming odds. Bombs and torpedoes streaked towards the Japanese carriers, each a potential harbinger of destruction. Yet, fortune, or perhaps the intricate dance of skilled seamanship, favoured the Japanese. The attacks, though perilously close, narrowly missed their targets, the Hiryu and her sister ship spared for now from the ravages of war. The reprieve, however, was fleeting. A second attack on Midway was deemed necessary, the destruction of the atoll imperative to the success of the larger operation. The call to action sparked a frenzy of activity as sailors, driven by adrenaline and duty, began the arduous task of rearming the planes. Bombs were hoisted, torpedoes secured, each movement executed with practiced efficiency. But time, that most precious and elusive commodity, was slipping away. Barely halfway through the rearming process, with only a fraction of the aircraft prepared for combat, the Kido Butai found itself in a precarious state, vulnerable and exposed. Hangars filled with explosives, decks cluttered with ordnance, they were a tempting target for any enemy audacious enough to strike. And then, the confirmation of Yamaguchi's darkest fears arrived, a message delivered with grim finality. Though the specifics remained shrouded in ambiguity, the presence of enemy naval vessels, however described, represented a grave threat, a clear and present danger that demanded immediate action. The strategic landscape had shifted, the initiative slipping from their grasp. An order emanating from Nagumo's flagship crackled across the airwaves, a directive that spoke of indecision and a dangerous wavering of resolve. Precious time had been squandered, and now, The Japanese forces were caught between two conflicting strategies: to complete the rearming and strike at the potential enemy fleet, or to launch a renewed assault on Midway. The paralysis was palpable, the consequences potentially catastrophic. Meanwhile, the relentless waves of aircraft from Midway continued to harass them, a constant reminder of their vulnerability. The Japanese anti-aircraft guns roared to life, spewing a storm of lead into the sky, a desperate attempt to ward off the attackers. The formidable power of the Japanese defense, honed through years of training and experience, began to exact its grim toll. An American plane faltered, spiraled downwards in flames, another followed suit, its demise a stark testament to the ferocity of the battle. The Americans, however, remained undeterred, their attacks relentless and unwavering. The Hiryu was repeatedly subjected to near misses, each explosion sending tremors through the ship, each near-death experience chipping away at the morale of the crew. Yamaguchi, his patience wearing thin, found himself increasingly frustrated with Admiral Nagumo's perceived indecisiveness. Why, he wondered, didn't the other carriers launch an attack while the Hiryu bore the brunt of the enemy onslaught? But the opportunity, if it had ever existed, was gone. The Japanese planes that had struck Midway earlier were returning, their fuel tanks nearing empty, their pilots exhausted. They needed to land, and they needed to land now. For a torturous half-hour, the Kido Butai engaged in the painstaking and time-consuming process of recovering the returning aircraft. A delicate ballet of skill and precision, a necessity that left them acutely vulnerable to attack. Yamaguchi, his composure stretched to its breaking point, could only watch as the precious minutes ticked away. Finally, the last plane screeched to a halt, its mission complete, its pilot weary but alive. But before a collective sigh of relief could be exhaled, a new and even graver threat materialized on the horizon. Swarms of American torpedo planes, their silhouettes stark against the azure sky, appeared over the water, heading directly for the Kido Butai, their intentions unmistakable. These were not the lumbering Army Air Force planes they had faced earlier. These were different, more menacing, more determined. It was now clear that they were not only facing American surface ships, but also American aircraft carriers. The Naval Air Force, the elite of the American Air Arm, had found them, and they were hungry for a fight. The Zeros that remained airborne, those guardians of the sky, sprang into action, diving down to intercept the incoming torpedo planes, their engines screaming in defiance. Like predatory birds, they swooped behind the slow and vulnerable American aircraft, their guns spitting fire. The skill of the Zero pilots was undeniable, their training unparalleled. With deadly precision, they unleashed a torrent of bullets, tearing through the flimsy frames of the American torpedo planes. One by one, the enemy aircraft plunged into the sea, their demise marked by distant splashes that punctuated the chaos of battle. Yamaguchi, his gaze fixed on the carnage unfolding before him, watched as the American torpedo bombers fell from the sky. Yet, amidst the destruction, a few determined pilots pressed on, their resolve unbroken. They flew closer and closer, somehow managing to navigate the maelstrom of bullets and explosions, and, against all odds, they launched their torpedoes. The deadly payload, unseen beneath the surface of the waves, streaked silently towards its targets. On board the Hiryu, 5 distinct wakes were spotted, approaching the starboard side with menacing speed. A frantic order was given, and the ship, responding with surprising agility for its size, swung around in a desperate attempt to evade the attack. Incredibly, through a combination of skillful seamanship and sheer luck, no Japanese ships were hit. The torpedoes passed harmlessly by, leaving only churning water in their wake. But the maneuvers, while successful in avoiding disaster, had disrupted the Kido Butai's formation, scattering the ships across the ocean. A brief cheer erupted amongst the crew, a spontaneous expression of relief and triumph. But Yamaguchi, his brow furrowed in concern, remained unmoved. He knew that despite their victory in repelling the American torpedo attack, the battle was far from over. The enemy was wounded, perhaps, but not defeated. At 10:22 a.m., he glanced skyward, and what he saw nearly stopped his heart. A seemingly endless stream of US Navy SBD Dauntless dive bombers, nearly 50 in number, descending from 2 different flights, filled the sky above. Their presence, a silent harbinger of doom, cast a long shadow over the Kido Butai. The Japanese Zero fighters, those guardians of the sky, were all engaged down low, preoccupied with mopping up the last of the enemy torpedo bombers. There were none in position to intercept the swarm of Dauntlesses preparing to dive from high above. Yamaguchi's stomach sank as he watched the Americans slowly, inexorably, edge into their dives, preparing to unleash their deadly payloads upon the unsuspecting Kido Butai. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and there was nothing he could do to prevent it. Southwest, a squadron of 30 Dauntless bombers, their wings glinting in the unforgiving sunlight, plunged towards the Kaga, the second largest carrier in the fleet, their descent a symphony of impending destruction. Japanese anti-aircraft fire, a furious barrage of lead and steel, snaked skywards, attempting to create a wall of defence, a futile barrier against the inevitable, but it was not enough. The American pilots, driven by a burning determination, pressed on, their aim unwavering, their resolve unshakable. On board the Kaga, chaos reigned. The hangar decks, normally a scene of organised activity, were now strewn with bombs and torpedoes, a volatile mix of fuel and high explosives, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. A series of catastrophic explosions ripped through the Kaga, tearing the ship apart with unimaginable force. The initial blast triggered secondary explosions, each one more devastating than the last, sending shock waves that reverberated through the surrounding ocean. Yamaguchi, witnessing the cataclysmic destruction from the bridge of the Hiryu, felt the heat of the fireball, a searing reminder of the brutal reality of war. He barely had time to register the devastation before he was forced to turn his attention to the east, where 17 more Dauntlesses were diving upon the Soryu, their intentions just as deadly. Bombs rained down upon the Soryu, each one finding its mark with chilling accuracy. An explosion, a deafening roar, a geyser of fire and smoke. The Soryu, once a proud symbol of Japanese naval power, was now engulfed in flames, its fate sealed. Through the inferno raging across the sea, Yamaguchi turned his gaze towards the Akagi, the flagship of Admiral Nagumo, his superior officer, to witness the final act of this devastating aerial ballet. Only 3 Dauntlesses were diving upon the Akagi, a seemingly insignificant number compared to the onslaught faced by the other carriers, but their aim was true, their impact decisive. The 3 Dauntlesses bore down upon the Akagi, their pilots unflinching in the face of intense anti-aircraft fire. 1 bomb was released, then another. The first 2 missed their target, splashing harmlessly into the water, but the third, the final bomb, found its mark with devastating precision. It smashed into the middle of the flight deck, piercing through the steel plating and detonating deep within the lower decks. The explosion triggered a chain reaction, igniting the fuel and ordnance stored within the ship. Devastating secondary explosions followed, ripping through the Akagi and turning her into a floating inferno. All that remained of the once mighty Kido Butai was Yamaguchi and his ship, the Hiryu, a lone survivor amidst the carnage. The wave of dive bombers, now out of bombs and low on fuel, were forced to disengage and head for home, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable destruction. Yamaguchi, his heart heavy with grief and a burning desire for revenge, found himself in command of the last remaining strike capability of the Kido Butai. The weight of responsibility, the burden of expectation, settled upon his shoulders with crushing force. A sense of grim determination washed over him, a resolve born from the ashes of defeat. He allowed himself a slight, almost imperceptible smile, a flicker of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. He nodded to his second-in-command, a silent acknowledgement of the task that lay ahead. The Hiryu would strike back, and she would strike hard. The honour of the Empire demanded it. 24 aircraft, a mix of dive bombers and fighters, were readied for launch, fueled, armed, and prepared for their mission of retribution. Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, commander of the Hiryu's dive bomber squadron, a man of unwavering courage and skill, led the formation, his face grim but resolute. En route to the American carriers, the Japanese formation encountered a group of US aircraft, a chance encounter that would have far-reaching consequences. The Japanese fighter escort, eager to engage the enemy, peeled off to intercept the American planes, leaving the bombers unprotected, exposed, and vulnerable. It was a fatal mistake, a strategic miscalculation that would cost them dearly. At 11:55, Kobayashi sighted the American fleet some 25 miles away, a cluster of ships on the horizon, their silhouettes stark against the azure sky. He identified one of the vessels as an American carrier, the primary target of their attack. He ordered his 18 dive bombers into a climb, gaining altitude for their attack run, their engines straining under the increased load. The Japanese planes flew in 2 groups of 9, one slightly above the other, ready to execute a coordinated attack, a synchronized ballet of destruction. But just as they were preparing to dive, disaster struck. 12 American Wildcat fighters, the rugged and dependable workhorses of the US Navy, rushed onto the scene, intercepting the Japanese formation with unexpected ferocity. The first group of Japanese bombers was immediately set upon by 5 Wildcats, their guns blazing, their pilots determined to protect their fleet. The other 7 Wildcats attacked the second group of Japanese bombers head-on, their attacks relentless and unforgiving. Without the protection of their fighter escort, the Japanese bombers were left at the mercy of the American Wildcats. It soon became a massacre, a chaotic dogfight in the sky. Japanese planes, caught in the crossfire, rapidly fell from the sky, their burning wreckage plunging into the ocean below. By the time the 4-0 fighters from the escort caught up, the damage had already been done. The Japanese formation was shattered, their ranks decimated. Only 10 Vals remained, 2 of which had jettisoned their bombs during the melee in order to maneuver, their mission compromised. Despite the heavy casualties, Lieutenant Kobayashi, his resolve undimmed, spotted an American carrier below, a tantalizing target amidst the chaos. It was the USS Yorktown, a veteran of numerous battles, a symbol of American resilience. Despite the overwhelming odds, Kobayashi was determined to press home the attack. He signalled for the remaining planes to begin their dive, their mission far from over. The 8 armed aircraft broke into 2 groups, ready to execute a coordinated attack, their movements precise and purposeful. One group of 3 headed east, while the other group of 5 circled to approach from out of the sun, hoping to catch the American defenders by surprise. Anti-aircraft fire, a furious barrage of flak and tracer rounds, snaked up towards the Japanese planes, the ship's gunners throwing everything they had at the attackers. The bravery of the Japanese pilots was unquestionable, their commitment unwavering. They pushed on, their aim unwavering, their resolve unshakable. Bombs were released, each one a potential harbinger of destruction. Lieutenant Kobayashi, leading the charge, was last seen in the middle of the action over the Yorktown, his Val hit by anti-aircraft fire and spiralling downwards, a fiery testament to his sacrifice. 2 more Japanese planes suffered the same fate, their wreckage joining Kobayashi's in the depths of the ocean. But 3 bombs, despite the heavy losses, found their mark, striking the Yorktown. In succession, their impact devastating. The first bomb penetrated the hangar deck, igniting the fuel and ordnance stored within. The second landed just next to the island amidships, causing widespread damage and disruption. The last bomb hit the elevator and detonated deep within her hull, causing catastrophic structural damage. The 5 remaining Vals, their mission accomplished, turned for home, their engines straining, their pilots weary but triumphant. By the end of the attack, the Hiryu's dive bomber unit had been shattered. 13 out of 18 Vals had been shot down, along with 3 Zero fighters. The losses were staggering, the cost of victory high. Despite their sacrifices, the attack had not been in vain. The Yorktown was severely damaged, her fighting capability significantly diminished. From the reports gleaned from returning scout planes, ambiguous as they often were, Yamaguchi pieced together a troubling picture. He was facing not 1, not 2, but potentially 3 American carriers. The situation was dire, the odds stacked heavily against him, but he refused to surrender to despair. He called upon Lieutenant Joichi Tomonaga, a seasoned pilot who had originally led the morning strike on Midway, a man whose courage and skill were beyond question. Tomonaga's own plane had sustained damage during the morning strike and had technically been deemed unserviceable, its fuel tanks leaking, its performance compromised. The technicians of the Hiryu, driven by a sense of urgency and loyalty, worked feverishly to patch up Tomonaga's damaged plane, their efforts a testament to their dedication. They did their best to repair the fuel tanks, to minimize the leaks, but the damage was extensive, the repairs only temporary. Tomonaga, fully aware of the risks, climbed into his damaged plane solemnly, his face etched with a mixture of determination and resignation. He knew that this was destined to be a one-way mission, a final act of sacrifice for the sake of his emperor and his country. An hour into the flight, Tomonaga sighted the US carrier task force some 35 miles away. A cluster of ships on the horizon, their presence a direct challenge to Japanese ambitions. He identified one of the vessels as a seemingly intact carrier, its decks clear, its operations seemingly unaffected by the earlier attacks. Tomonaga had no idea that this was actually the previously damaged Yorktown, a ship struggling to stay afloat, her crew battling valiantly to keep her in the fight. To Tomonaga, the Yorktown presented a target of opportunity, a chance to strike a decisive blow against the enemy. He immediately ordered an attack, his voice crackling over the radio, his instructions clear and concise. The Japanese planes, their engines roaring, entered a gentle dive from altitude, their movements precise and coordinated. Tomonaga split his force into 2 groups of 5, each group tasked with sweeping ahead of the target and conducting an anvil attack, a classic maneuver designed to overwhelm the enemy's defences. Tomonaga, piloting the lead plane, coaxed his damaged aircraft nearer and nearer to the Yorktown, his gaze fixed on the target, his heart pounding with anticipation. He ached to score a hit, to deliver a crippling blow that would avenge the losses of the morning and turn the tide of battle. But before he could get close enough, disaster struck. An American Wildcat fighter patrolling the skies above the carrier intercepted Tomonaga from behind, its guns blazing, its pilot determined to protect his ship. Tomonaga's Kate, riddled with bullets, caught alight, flames licking at the fuselage, smoke billowing from the engine. But with grim determination and unwavering skill, Tomonaga held the burning plane level, long enough for him to drop his torpedo. He was shot. Down, his burning plane tumbling into the water, a tragic end to a courageous life. The last thing he saw was the trail of his torpedo streaking towards the Yorktown, a final act of defiance against the enemy. But his torpedo, like so many others that day, failed to find its mark. Neither did the 2 others launched by his 4-plane section. All of them were shot down by fighters or anti-aircraft fire, their crews lost to the depths of the ocean. The Yorktown, despite the relentless attacks, continued to fight, her crew working tirelessly to repair the damage and keep her afloat. The damaged Yorktown turned as quickly as she could, attempting to evade the incoming torpedoes, her movements sluggish and laboured. But as she did, the second force of 5 planes streaked towards the port bow, their pilots determined to succeed where Tomonaga had failed. The release system of one of the torpedo planes malfunctioned, causing all 4 torpedoes to be launched in quick succession. They streaked towards the desperately manoeuvring ship, their wakes cutting through the water like silver knives. 2 devastating explosions rocked the port side of the Yorktown, tearing holes in her hull and sending shockwaves throughout the ship. She immediately came to a halt, her engines silent, her momentum lost. She took on a list of 23 degrees, a dangerous tilt that threatened to capsize her. The Yorktown, wounded and crippled, was now dead in the water, a floating testament to the ferocity of the battle and the courage of her crew. Their work was done, the surviving planes turned for home, their mission accomplished, their hearts heavy with loss but filled with a sense of grim satisfaction. In spite of the heavy losses, the debriefing of the surviving pilots gave Yamaguchi cause for encouragement. He believed that he had disabled a second American carrier, a crucial step towards levelling the playing field and regaining the initiative. He planned a third strike for 6 p.m., a final push to cripple the remaining American forces and secure victory. But before he could launch his plan into action, Yamaguchi's optimism was shattered, his hopes dashed by a single devastating message. At 3:50 in the afternoon, a Japanese scout aircraft, its radio crackling with static, transmitted a message that sent a chill down Yamaguchi's spine. 2 other American carriers were operating in another large task force located to the northwest, some 120 miles from the Hiryu. The news was a crushing blow, a confirmation of his worst fears. The Americans had reinforcements, fresh ships and aircraft ready to enter the fray. The odds, already stacked against the Japanese, had become insurmountable. Yamaguchi's carefully laid plans, his hopes of a decisive victory crumbled before him. The tide of battle had turned, and there was little he could do to stop it. Just over an hour later, at 5 p.m., the skies above the Hiryu filled with the ominous silhouettes of American aircraft. 24 in number, they appeared overhead, their intentions clear. The final act of the tragedy was about to unfold. 6 dauntless bombers, their engines screaming, dove on the Hiryu, their pilots determined to deliver the killing blow, but the ship, responding with surprising agility, turned sharply to port, evading the attack. Japanese gunners, their faces grim but resolute, unleashed a furious barrage of anti-aircraft fire, their aim unwavering. All enemy planes, despite their best efforts, failed to score a hit, their bombs splashing harmlessly into the water, but the reprieve was brief. Soon, 14 more dive bombers turned for the Hiryu, their approach relentless, their determination unwavering. The Hiryu was straddled with spouts of white water as she violently turned, a desperate attempt to evade the incoming bombs. 2 bombs, however, found their mark, striking the ship on the forward flight deck, their impact sending tremors throughout the vessel. Yamaguchi looked up to see a final group of 3 Dauntlesses begin their dives, their movements precise and purposeful. In a matter of seconds, 2 more bombs hit the forward flight deck of the Hiryu, creating a deep crater and igniting a series of secondary explosions. The fires, now burning out of control, quickly spread throughout the ship, consuming everything in their path. The last hope of Yamaguchi's strike force, the aircraft still stored in the hangars, lay blazing in the inferno below. At 9:23 p.m., the Hiryu, her engines silent, her steering unresponsive, went dead in the water, a floating inferno adrift on the vast expanse of the Pacific, but with Yamaguchi still aboard, his spirit unbroken, his resolve unyielding. Darkness settled across the flaming ocean, a sombre curtain drawn across the scene of devastation. At 2:30 a.m., some 800 survivors, their faces blackened with soot, their bodies weary and wounded, gathered around Yamaguchi in the flickering light of the burning ship. With that, the men turned to face Tokyo, their faces illuminated by the inferno engulfing their ship. "Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!" they cried, their voices hoarse but resolute, a final tribute to their emperor and their country. The national ensign, the rising sun, was then lowered from the yardarm, its descent a symbol of defeat and sacrifice. As the flag fluttered down, a flourish of bugles rang through the night, playing the national anthem, Kimigayo, a mournful melody that echoed across the water. Yamaguchi, his face calm and serene, asked for 2 messages to be conveyed. The first to Admiral Nagumo, his superior officer. "We regret that we were unable to live up to your expectations." The second message went to Captain Toshio Abe, commanding Destroyer Division 10 on the nearby flagship Kazagumo. "Please sink this ship." Captain Kaku, the Hiryu's steadfast commander, chose to share the fate of his ship, remaining on board despite Yamaguchi's order to evacuate. The admiral understood and did not protest, his respect for Kaku unwavering. At 5:10 a.m, the destroyer Makigumo fired 2 torpedoes at the crippled Hiryu. One missed its target, its trajectory skewed by the turbulent waters. The other, however, exploded with a deafening roar, tearing a hole in the ship's hull and hastening her demise. The carrier, once a proud symbol of Japanese naval power, finally succumbed to the waves at 9:12 a.m, disappearing beneath the surface of the ocean, taking with her the hopes and dreams of an empire. Admiral Taman Yamaguchi went down with his ship, a warrior to the end, his sacrifice a testament to his unwavering loyalty and his unwavering belief in the cause for which he fought. He was posthumously